Those who have pursued the unseen were seen as cursed. Sometimes they were. More often, they were victims of a cruel church, a ruthless ruling class, and ignorant minds. We, however, live in a different age. Do not fear, seeker of the unseen. Today is a new dawn. The dawn of the dragon Djinn.
Hello, my name is Aristomenes, and welcome once again to another installment of Djinn Alchemy. This is the 6th video in the first series of installments. I want to notify listeners or viewers that after I'm finished with the general informative cycle of these discourses, I'm going to get into a more specific occult chain of videos that are going to involve diagrams and more like a lecture mode of all of the methods and approaches and understandings, the knowledge that I apply in Djinn Alchemy, so you understand where I'm coming from. I've done a lot of personal research and application over the years, over the period of since 1995 actually. Accelerated after the year 2000 and accelerated greatly after the year 2005. I've been dedicating more and more time to this. So the more you practice these things, the more experiences you have, the more you are motivated to commit to get more experiences, the more you progress and evolve and are empowered by it. But the notion of empowerment, again, can be a little misunderstood, but that's not the topic of this discourse. This discourse is going to be about how I got here. So yeah, in 1995, you might say it started because that was the first time I came into contact with the Goetia of Solomon, with the Lesser Key of Solomon, specifically the first book of the Lesser Key of Solomon. Around that time, I was looking at other grimoire type books that were essentially applications of magic. Now, I came from practicing yoga, and I didn't stop that practice. Basically the tantric schools of yoga, that was what I was exploring, meditation and all of that. And again, like I say, I haven't let up on that. But I reached a point where my awareness was sensitive enough that I felt I can get into the pursuit of magic, Kabbalah, Hermetics, some ceremonial magic, and runes, things like that, the power of the word, and Western systems, essentially, without it all becoming a mental exercise or having to engage in extended focus because the meditation already covered that, without having to learn correspondences because I could feel the differences between them, energy-wise, you might say. So the whole thing was almost like I could step in. It's almost like when I learned to play piano. Back in high school in Greece, I was, we had a music class, and in that music class we learned to read notes. That's almost all we did, just a little bit of singing and learning to read notes. So the teacher basically said, okay, here, you have a song in front of you with the notes, and you tap on the table and announce the note. So I was able to read notes, and then when I went into piano, just started taking piano lessons when I was 13, it became a hell of a lot easier because I didn't have to learn as I played. Although many people do. And thus I was able to progress a lot faster than some of the other students. The thing is, that led me, not that specific thing, but that was part of a kind of sense that I had that, look, if you can practice or exercise, for example, like you're learning a sport, you're playing a sport, you need to be in shape, so you might go work out, do exercises, run around the track, do things to keep yourself in shape, and don't just rely on the sport to get you in shape. Many occultists these days believe the magic alone, if you practice it enough, is enough to keep you in shape. Maybe for some people who are inherently sensitive. There are, just like you have talents in music, just like you have talents in sports and other things. For some people, mathematics comes easily. So when they do physics, they automatically, the mathematics of physics makes sense to them. They take the math classes, they whiz through them, the logic of it makes sense to them more than others. Others bang their head against the wall and realize this isn't for me, even though the ideas of physics may come easily to them. Speaking as a physicist myself, or at least one educated as such. It's kind of strange coming from that direction and moving into occultism. That's why, one thing that it has taught me is to avoid what we might call pseudoscience and not associate occultism with pseudoscience. Occultism is a kind of art. Not the same as the fine arts, but it's a skill. And it is based on self-cultivation, in my honest opinion. So this segment is going to be about the sequence of events that led me to address the Dragon Djinn, what I experienced as I was addressing the Dragon Djinn for the first time, before they were the Dragon Djinn, just the 72 spirits of the Goetia. And without going into my prior experience in occultism, the other little experiments I did at the time, what I was reading at the time and all that, just going to get into that. And then later on, as I got deeper into it, you might call it the second cycle, because the first cycle, started kind of rough, and then I stepped back from it and had to cultivate even more. And then a decade later, I got into the system much more deeply. It kind of called back to me, said, okay, we're ready for you now, or you're ready for us now. There's always an interaction with these spirits, even if you kind of summon them and they seem to create an adverse, it's stressful or strenuous, there is a part of them, a kind of maybe a consciousness, not the energy so much, but something there that is always present, or always accessible. And I'm not talking about possession. I'm talking about if you're serious about it, if you're serious about working with them, they will be serious about working with you, regardless of the energy forms or programming or patternings that seem to establish a friction between you. I've come to learn that this friction is actually a call toward cultivation. By cultivation, self-development, developing the skill set, the psychic skill set, the magical skill set, the mystical skill set, you might say. And not to confuse the mystical skill set with some kind of, transformation of identity. You don't have to be a saint or lose your ego or get into some, psychedelic state of awareness to, engage in this kind of thing. You just need to cultivate your sensitivity. And of course, what I call your integrity. That helps a lot because it helps maintain balance in you. So I want to talk about the beginning of my work with the Dragon Djinn, which then were just the spirits of the Goetia. I call them the Dragon Djinn again because they are associated with the powers of the land, beneath the land, the underworld, the powers of magic, the powers of the four elements. I don't consider them, as some do, elementals per se, like undines and sylphs and gnomes and salamanders, as per the Renaissance and medieval understanding of such things. I essentially consider them to be non-corporeal geniuses of the powers of the earth. At the same time, we are of the earth. I am not of the viewpoint that human beings are spirits in spacesuits called bodies. I believe that our bodies are physical, the physical body, and even the energy bodies, and all these layers to the center are cycled back into the earth and cycled back again when we incarnate. So you might say this is an understanding of reincarnation, but not a linear one. Things are far more flexible and complex. You can't overthink things because you're associating them with linear logic. So there's a balance between intuition and logic that's needed here. Again, there's no way to where do you come from with these things? That's the best anybody can show you. That I come from this tradition, or what these people thought, or what this thing was, or what this said, or my own revelations. And again, a revelation isn't just a speculative, whimsical imagining of something. It is a profound sense of peering into the truth of a matter. Where it has impact, where a light bulb lights up, or there it is. You feel aligned with it. It's a whole different experience than just going, oh, that sounds cool, that must be it, or it might be this, or here's my opinion. It's a little more impacting, quite a bit more impacting. Sometimes a revelation is life-altering. So I take the whole sense of revelation seriously in that sense. But what I want to get into right now is how I got started in this. And again, like I said, I have a history of meditating since 1982. So, that's over a decade. And the meditation was also exploratory, exploring psychic effects, exploring anything but occultism per se. I kind of brushed against it. I never practiced it. I never really read the book, so to speak. I did read some things, but only having to do with things like maybe pathworking the tree of life, or developing psychic abilities, psychic self-defense, things like that. Phenomena like perceiving ghosts. The exception was I was into astrology and into the tarot. And the tarot helped me develop my intuition, my ability to read symbols. And astrology also helped me in my pattern recognition, because when you do a chart and you kind of associate it with people's qualities, you need pattern. You need to recognize the patterns of the chart and also associate them with the patterns of the people you're observing, without projecting, and that's not easy. At the same time, I had a friend who got into astrology with me, and he just wanted to take his whole family and did the charts of his family, and he saw the trends of the genetic trends reflected directly into the astrology charts. And I'm sure he's not the only one. I mean, if you really want to see if astrology works, you don't, go and try to justify it scientifically, because there's a whole bunch of theories. And for me, it's not too far-fetched to say that, okay, there's such a thing as fields around the planets, fields in the solar system, a solar wind. All of these are interacting, and at the moment of birth, we are very vulnerable to an imprint from these fields that may affect us epigenetically. Again, at the risk of going pseudoscientific and pretending to, expound in that direction, I kind of, am reluctant to move deeper in these kinds of explanations. Because, you can easily run with it. And many things are not proven, many things are not for certain in science. And the things that are for certain can be modified as new things are discovered. However, we live in an age where you can't always keep the science out of it. You can't pretend to live in the 1500s with that kind of mindset. I don't even know what that mindset was. No matter how much I read about it, I am not living it. However, intuitively, I can kind of guess, or kind of project myself into that zone, like anybody. And in fact, occultism helps you to intuit things like that. And one of the abilities of the genie or geniuses of the Goetia, many times you will read in their offices, it says to learn about the past, present, and future. You can read the past better. You can understand what's going on in the present. It heightens your sense of event detection, event discernment. And you can also predict trends in the future. This is not, in my honest opinion, being able to, there's the future, that's where we're going, I've read it no matter what. No, you actually have a sense of the probabilistic topography, where the trends are going. And you can essentially see that this event is coming. Even if it seems out of the blue, it's another form of pattern recognition, in my honest opinion. And again, there are trends, there are motives, there are motives in the environment. I'm not talking about human motives only. I'm talking about a kind of, directiveness, a purposefulness, you might say. But it doesn't have to be a human purposefulness. So animals are purposeful. They go out, they seek food, they reproduce, whatever, they hunt, they forage, they eat grass, whatever. That is their specific purpose. It's not random. It's according to their structure, to their nature. So everything has a nature, so that nature motivates each and everything to act accordingly. And it may not be as deterministic as we think, or some people think, and it's not random either. It's somewhere in between. It's very flexible in that sense. So let me continue with a very brief mention that in 1995, without going into detailed circumstances, I hit upon the Lesser Key of Solomon. I think it was the one you commonly find in bookstores. With drawings of the demons or looking like demons, these horrendous depictions, and with the offices and whatever you can find online today, plus the sigils. And it made an impression on me because of all these other books on the topic that I've seen and read, this was the only one, and it was one of the more propagated ones that really had sigils this complex. And the thing is, when I opened it, I could feel energy coming from the sigils. Like I said, meditation kind of sensitizes you to things. You can develop, you can have more prophetic dreams. You can have more intuition. You can have psychometric abilities, like feel something and get impressions from. Feel something, like somebody gives you a coin and you get impressions of it. It doesn't always work, but you can notice that overall, certain tendencies that may be called psychic abilities may be more enhanced than otherwise. I saw that myself over the years, And so one of these things was the ability to detect a feel, an energy, a sense. And so the seals basically were like projecting. And I was like, wow, this doesn't feel like anything hostile or evil or whatever. Whatever it is something worth exploring, and maybe it's a waste of time, but let's see what it does. This is a system apparently of where you can even connect to one of these, and if even 1% of this is true, it's always something that can be beneficial. On the other hand, if it's something adverse or unhealthy, then I probably need to have an experience like that in order to, you can't be avoiding shit all your life. So if there is shit out there and it's right in the bookstore, so you open up a book, and it gets you, that's ridiculous for me, If something, I was playing around with the book called The Necronomicons by Peter Leventa, and that's a fabricated, work. It takes out from Hellenistic occultism, from, one of the seals is from the Greater Key of Solomon. Allegedly it's much older, but in this case it wasn't. He uses the Ladder of Lights from Babylon. He uses the 50 names of the god Marduk from the Enuma Elish, and another Assyrian list of divine names. And an artist would make these interesting looking sigils of the 50 names, and I thought that was worth exploring. And I found eventually, even in years after that, the association with Babylonian and Sumerian magic and myth, even the Hellenized versions, that they fabricated themselves, had some merit. You could actually use it. And in fact, it's even recommended these days for a beginner to get their, to just check it out and stuff. And the structure of it was to me workable. But it wasn't as concise and the potential of it. Basically, let's put it this way. The Goetia is based on something far more recent. It's far better connected to the modern world than what Peter Leventa tried to create with the Necronomicon, even though that's based on Lovecraft stuff, the fantasy writer Howard Phillips Lovecraft, that most people know about. And he wrote that at the turn of the century, at the time when the 20th century technology, World War I, it was a time of turmoil, of drastic change. About a century earlier, the Shi'ar, the Sumerian, civilization was uncovered for the first time for, since a couple of thousand years ago. Whole cities were discovered. So that may have released something in the sense of an influence, of a magical influence. You say you mess with a haunted, graveyard, you're gonna release something into the world. So it appeared that, this coincided, this started affecting things, in my honest opinion again. So I'm talking more or less like an occultist. You mess with artifacts, the artifacts are charged with something from the past. That something from the past is activated. It starts affecting individual consciousness, mass consciousness, and it may even affect the course of history. We're talking about the cradle of civilization, the official cradle of civilization here, at least Western civilization. So in any case, that's just an example. Things are far more complex. Retrospectively, I can tell you that the Goetia, and other people might agree, is not as complex, but at the same time, it has its own complications. If you really, because it's very, very hard to take the entities and say, okay, this entity is this and this entity is that, and they belong here, and they organize this way with each other, because the thing was to associate each entity with a specific compass direction and perhaps a specific element. As well as, now then you had the ranks of the entities, which are associated there with a specific metal and planet. So there's alchemical elements that are in the Lesser Key of Solomon that are not found in other grimoires, earlier grimoires especially. So I don't mean to imply with all of the previous that I created the Dragon Djinn, but I have, organized this system known as, that I call Djinn Alchemy, to separate it from the rest. But everything that I'm using is traditional material. It's not a mishmash. It's not arbitrary. It's experienced, it's tested, and why do I emphasize that? Because I feel guilty. I see so much stuff that does seem a little arbitrary or clumsily put together. These days, I also see efforts to get back and re-examine things and make things more organized. There's more scholarship these days. But again, in occultism, and especially, this kind of conjuring type occultism, it's hard to, it's not a science. It's a skill, and the skill extends into mystical dynamics, and it extends into artistry, into psychic artistry, and basic, and as well as scholarship, as an understanding of how others did it, the legitimate so-called, what worked. But these types of things evolve, they change over time. The basics may apply, but there are times when new things are included, when things are reorganized, when other ideologies come in. You can see gods, for example, as cultures mix, they blend in with other gods over time, and they change their names, or they two gods are like two pools of 2 drops of water, or the cohesion keeps the shape standard, but as they approach each other and they touch, they become one single drop of water. And who is what then? Is this like an offspring of the two? Is it a fusion or a different entity? And I think it is an evolution. Things are very, very fluid in non-corporeal experience. So let me just briefly. So this discourse is about how I got started, but it is more so about the spirit of how I got started, more than the sequence of events. I just got the book, I took it home, I opened it up, I got some paper and I had epoxy, and the way I was doing it was like, okay, the center of this is the seals, the sigils. So you take the sigils and you essentially, meditate on them, focus on them. No circles, no banishing, no following the 5 steps. Consecration was there with a little bit of meditation. Communion, evocation was an act of will, and it worked. I felt a response. It wasn't like summoning it in a triangle or a vase or a mirror or anything like that. Mind's eye. All of a sudden, your powers of visualization increase. All of a sudden, you enter an almost hypnagogic state. And it's not an state that you induce first. The hypnagogic state is almost part and parcel of communion with the so-called spirit. And it's not one where you feel like you're in a at least for me, when I say you, I mean my own experience. The ceremony isn't there, to prepare me, and I don't use that. I don't use incense or anything like that. So what happened was this raw experience came out, and then for a while it was like a natural high, and I was like, okay, now let's use it. Let's tell the spirit to do things for me. Okay, what's going on in the future? What's going on? And then I could feel a grating. I mean, it wasn't like, oh, you're imagining something. If I was imagining something, then I'd have a fantasy of experiencing what's going on in the future. Or if I was that deluded. I'd like to think that years of meditation have made me a little more discerning, where I can explore these things and not project or be in denial or stuff like that. I mean, really, you do become more sensitive, not less. So what I did experience was a hostility. This thing was resisting, and I wasn't trying to force it. I was like, okay, let's negotiate. But it became more and more hostile. At first, the connection was almost like a waking up. Here's energy. But then I thought, it's tricking me. I was stuck on all of these ideas of what this entity, just looking at the time to see what I am, what this entity is, is it, and I couldn't actually believe this can't be part of my subconscious. What's this? I mean, and there's no way to essentially, prove that it isn't, but at the same time, how messed up can you be? I'm so messed up that every time I try to, do my own intuition about the future, some monster comes up and tries to attack me, then, why doesn't it do that with tarot cards? Because you believe it's a monster. Well, that is partly true. That is partly true, but it isn't just simple belief. This is the energy itself of the seal, the entity itself, somehow expressing something that has been conditioned into it. The relationship, in my opinion, was conditioned. And it was conditioned also in such a way that my response and my sensitivity up to that point, my willpower, everything about me was not sufficient to bypass the conditioning. And I'm talking about a state where you could tangibly feel the energy, the hostility, the emotional state, and the sensate kind of state that was coming out of this sigil. Somebody would say, demonic and whatever. No, objects did not move around. This didn't affect physical reality, except to create a sequence of the opposite of what these things are supposed to do. Instead of good luck, it's bad luck. And then I noticed that people around me were more hostile than usual. But not because they felt anything bad for me. I was like, okay, I'm just me, man. I'm not doing anything. But almost like they were getting possessed and it was coming out of them. So somebody who wasn't into esoteric perception and cognition that's esoterically oriented or thinking along these lines might think they were going crazy. And I didn't go down that path. Basically I said, I'm going to keep working with these and see what happens. So every day I would, just flip through the thing and see which was the least hostile. So I'd work from the least hostile to the most hostile and keep the most powerful ones out of it, so to speak, and just work through them, try to learn about them, get their energy. But every time, and I make a seal and just set it aside. So I would work with these one a day at first, and then I accelerated 2 a day, because what would happen was, and this is counterintuitive, what would happen was that as soon as I would, get into and feel the essence and the awareness and summon and the response and almost like develop an internal dialogue with this thing, the time that it was actually manageable became less and less and less, from being a couple of hours to being, 1 hour, half an hour, 15 minutes, 5 minutes, then almost instant hostility then. By the time I was done with all 72, my life was topsy-turvy, streaks of bad luck, I was constantly depressed, that kind of thing. Things were not well. But there was one thing, I used to try to connect with angels, and although one would think, you're meditating, you're spiritual, I could sustain these heightened states, but I would feel ungrounded. I would be incredibly ungrounded. And I almost would be lost in my own little world. That's the one thing of extended meditation that you got to look out for. It's helpful, but it's very easy to like detach from the world. even if you're an idealist, and you can easily get blindsided by things. Where my intuition was supposed to be, I could sense people's feelings and stuff like that. I was more acute in that sense. At the same time, I'd be blindsided by events. I should have seen this event coming, but it didn't. I didn't. Then I could do tarot readings, but sometimes my tarot readings would be affected by something and it'd go awry. So my experience with the spirits here came around that time when I also needed to ground. But grounding almost had to occur through this fog, this crazy terrain of what these spirits represented. And over the years, when I started getting onto the internet later, I would listen to accounts from other people, and there were a lot more accounts of, some people were saying, oh, they're not as bad as the spirits of the Necronomicon and all of this, which are horrific. And it's like, well, yes and no. A part of it is because of the expectation. The expectation doesn't make it feel bad, but it kind of gives permission of something out there to latch on to the symbolism and use it as a conduit, much like in a Ouija board. A Ouija board is just a board. You're just sitting there. You say, okay, something comes. Let my, subconscious involuntarily move to the letter. It's like doing a tarot reading or a pendulum, which also uses your subconscious, but nobody gets possessed by a pendulum. Why the hell do they get possessed by a Ouija board? I never seen anybody, hypnotists, use a pendulum to answer questions because of your involuntary muscle, movements. They move the pendulum. All you need is a small movement. With the Ouija board, of course, you need, the thing's moving around, so you need a bigger type of impulse. The subconscious actually is more active than, it's not so subtle, as it were. So at the same time, if there wasn't so much hype, and if the people who tend to get possessed the most, were not teenagers, I would say something inherently, is going on. But I do think that the Ouija board phenomenon is partly fabricated. Not so much that it's a self-hypnosis. You feel you're convincing yourself because it's too much hype and you're a volatile teenager or whatever. But also that when you open up your subconscious under these assumptions, there is something out there that might come and interfere. So this isn't a religious thing of the fallen angels and the evil devils and whatever. This is like going into the jungle and expecting, you might, if you're not careful, you might have a venomous snake, you might have a venomous insect, you might have some kind of parasite crawl up your butt. These things are part of the non-corporeal fauna and flora, you might say, of, our terrestrial environment. To wrap this up, because I don't want to go on and on, in 1995, I started working with him, and I worked with him for about a year. And you say, how can you go through all these experiences? Well, like I said, I do meditate. There are methods to kind of keep circulating, to purify yourself, to, create not bubbles of light and stuff like that. But basically, for me, it was an exploration into the underworld, or what the underworld represented, to an area of awareness that I could not enter before. So yes, I was accosted, you might say, and it was painful, and it brought up a lot of painful stuff, and it wasn't gentle or pretty. So I dropped these guys. I kept the book, I dropped them, I ripped the seals up, I said, okay, enough, that's it. And eventually, they didn't go away. But I did end up moving into, I like meditate and stuff like that, and the meditation is kind of an Indian type thing, a Hindu type thing, although I'm not religiously inclined in that direction. But I happened to fall upon some books about the god Ganesh, and it almost seemed like that was calling me. So the angels wouldn't really work, even though I tried, I learned enough Hebrew letters at the time to be able to write angelic names and tone them. And I felt a deeper connection than I did before, which was interesting because I wasn't involved in the light, so to speak. I was involved in the dark, exploring it, not using it to hurt anybody or anything. So instead, the god Ganesh was like, well, this guy opens doorways, and it's an Eastern one. What does he have to do with Western stuff? And for me, it was like, well, East-West, it doesn't matter. You know, if I can relate to it, then I can bring it in my perspective, and it can relate to me, and we can relate to each other in that sense. So what happened was that it really did open up something, you know, and the mantras and the toning and the sense of the energy of the deity, because it helps to protect your mind, it helps to protect your energy field, and it protects your interface with the planetary field, with the ground, the so-called root center, the seat, you know, the area, the energetic area of your tailbone and the sacral bone, or below that. And so it helps to protect the gateway, the whatever goes on with the underworld. Counterintuitively, of course, because it's like, well, you should have, you know, gotten this before. Why are you getting it afterwards? Well, because I needed the encounter raw and unfiltered. This is hindsight talking, of course. I didn't know then. Then it was like, oh, this is cool, let's try it. You know, more like a kind of, you know, stepping the fool tarot card. Have you ever seen the tarot cards? The fool, he like walks over a cliff carrying his knapsack with his dog gapping at his heels, you know. But it also represents the beginnings of wisdom. So I wasn't hurt by this, you know, overtly. It was very stressful, and I wouldn't recommend it. And so when I returned to the system later, my idea was to ensure that, well, if these potentials open, it's really cool, because what happened is that I could tune into the so-called angelic awareness through the names and the associations and stuff. And it helped greatly. These things help in a way that's very... It's not easy to describe to people who think in terms of course material benefits as being the only thing. And it's not also, and because people think that way, they associate anything more subtle as being all in your head. Although your head may be one of the conduits through which it accesses the rest of you and your life, it is not all in your head. You know, that is not where it is born, that is not, you know, its genesis. Nobody knows. This is more non-local. So it took me about 10 years going through life and all these experiences that I had just normally living between 1995 and 2005 to formally return to the Goetia. In between that time, I would open up the book sometimes and say, oh, yeah, let's see. Or did I have it even? You know, I don't even know if I had it. I left it because I lived in the United States for a while and then came to Greece again. And in any case, you know, later I'd see it online. But the point is that every time I looked at a sigil from whatever source, you know, the sigil would just growl at me, no matter which one. So it depends what entity it was. Some would growl, some would ignore me, some would, you know, they were still there. At the same time, with the angelic and the other awareness, something was distilled from the genies, these spirits. You might as well call them jinn or genies. I call them genies for short, you know, it's a common term. So something was distilled that was almost like a consciousness that wasn't hurtful or harmful. It was less grounded, more abstract, much more subtle. So that would be almost like a collective guidance. They were always there, and it was always like an interaction. It's like, okay, is it time? You know, well, and it wasn't so much that it could give me definite information. It was very vague. Almost something that I wouldn't even consider it, because that almost seemed like it was in my head if I tried to pinpoint it. Otherwise, you know, it was far more easy to access or work with if I treated it like you could treat something moving in your peripheral vision. As long as you don't try to focus on it directly, it's in your peripheral vision and it's there. If you try to focus on it, it disappears. So that's how it was until I finally figured, okay, you know, I got into other methods again, deeper into more grounded methods like Kundalini yoga, things that were considered, you know, people, what I was reading and into was saying, oh, it's dangerous, don't do it this way, just be consciousness oriented. So I got more into a body-centered occult approach, more into a deep, grounded, energy-centered occult approach. And that was part of what helped the relationship, because it was like, oh, you're entering like a foreigner. You have to be more familiar with that level of awareness that corresponds to the underworld. Anybody who's been in a haunted house and felt disturbed, or a graveyard and felt the energies of the graves, you know, it's that level of awareness, that kind of experience. So if you're comfortable with that, then you can start communicating on a more tangible level with these formations, entities, spirits, geniuses, genie, however you want to call them. So I started organizing with respect of which one was friendlier and which one, and working more to fill in the blanks. And I did this, and I found a few people that along the way that were willing to test, from a fresh perspective what I was doing. And there were some other people online that were telling me that I was dangerous and what was I doing, bringing these newbies in that didn't know what they, But there was one individual, in fact, the one that's helping me do these videos, that's doing the editing. Very good friend of mine. And he basically went through the system with me. And then, according to his perspective, it helped him a great deal. And he was the one person that very much encouraged me to make this public. So thanks a lot, dude. That remains to be seen. I mean, blowback is who knows what on the internet. But I'm still refining the system. And right now, this is more than a video log. This is what I've come up with, and I want to share with you. And the details are important. But at this point, it can be used as a system of cultivation. At some point, I kind of made an agreement with some of the most potent of these entities hey, if you can take us and present us and share us, then we can work with you even better. And we can work with others even better. And there won't be the hauntings, there won't be all of these things, because we are not being undermined. In fact, it's in our best interest that human beings, those who can, those who are predisposed, open their minds, their hearts, not for possession or anything like that, but quite the contrary, to be able to stand on their own 2 feet, to not be swayed by superstition, to be able to explore these things, to be able to access their own innate potential. This is important because when you are healthy in mind and body especially in mind and soul, when you're healthy and motivated in harmony with your nature, shall we say, that's in harmony with the planet, then, everything benefits. What goes around comes around type of thing. Everything benefits. So everything is motivated. Human beings are a key and pivotal creature on this planet. They are not just some scum of the earth. They're not a virus. They're not trash. They're not, killers of the planet. They're going through a major crisis, and these entities actually know this, as far as I'm concerned. The elementals know this. There was great animosity against humanity for a while, but that is turning around. So this is far more natural than trying to work with extraterrestrial intelligence, which I do not deny exists, but I don't believe it's really people in flying saucers with technology as we would define technology, the distances, anything we relate to technology, the whole metaphor of technology for us is on a whole other level than what you would really need to, travel interstellar distances. And, like Arthur C. Clarke said, a technology advanced enough would seem like magic to us. And magic grounded enough might seem like technology to us, But in any case, it's the magic that's natural. And technology is artificial or fabricated. The magic is a skill. Technology uses external items, non-ritualistically, but actually structures something. So you might say that there is such a thing as a magical technology, but I would call it more like magical design, occult esoteric design. It is a creative process to design the system, to bring elements together, and it's not off the top of mine or anybody else's head. I believe you can work with these entities, but again, maybe the word entity is a misnomer for some people, so I will not be concrete on what these are in any so-called scientific sense. You can't even go there. You can't say they're demons, angels. What are those anyways? They are non-corporeal intelligence that can be experienced so tangibly they're almost physical. There is that point. Just like you can have a dream or a psychedelic experience or whatever, or a hypnotic suggestion, that is as real or close to reality, but it's not really as real. You might think it is. So, the experience can be near tangible as far as I'm concerned. Now, that's about all the time we have. This has gone on a little longer than the other videos, but I wanted to express it. So here we go. It wasn't some miraculous process. It was a slow process. I was trained, between 2005 and 2010 or even now, I was trained in the sense of, in the beginning especially, if you want us to become a little less hostile, if you want us to be more smooth, work with us this way, cultivate this, your willpower is needed, you need to have confidence, all of these things. This wasn't the behavior of entities that, wanted to possess me, hated my guts or whatever. So I've come out stronger and more capable, and in a sense, I want to share this. So that's all I have to say on the subject right now. I might get into it again. It's too big to define everything that's gone on into the creation of this. But what I want to enter here is what has been created, what has been designed, what has been established, and how it can help you. I want to keep elaborating on this, going even deeper into it. Try to answer questions that might come up, even though at this recording I haven't posted anything yet. Per se. I want this to come out as a playlist that people can actually look at, if possible, one at a time. Even if you go and bounce around, it's all right, but you'd get most out of it if you could see it one at a time. And then after this series of discourses is over, I will get into a more regular presentation of certain occult topics. One of the things that you do learn that was held in high esteem in at least the Renaissance and Middle Ages, in the Middle Ages especially, where there wasn't a printing press, was that, non-corporeal intelligence teaches you things. It gives you knowledge or wisdom. It at least opens your mind up to possibilities that you can explore intuitively, or gives you a sense of running into the resources like books or people that can teach you, or a series of events that can be illuminating for you. They placed a high value on that. And these days we can take that for granted because of the internet. But you still need the discernment to distinguish what is misinformation, disinformation, what works for you or doesn't. Because something might work for you, but it might not work as well as you really need it to work. And you might settle for less without even realizing it. So discernment is important, and that's one of the things. And you say, well, I can learn discernment with some kind of other exercise, and that's fine, but this way has a lot of advantages. So I want to get into those advantages again. I mentioned some of it in previous videos, but I want to get into them more systematically in future videos, maybe in the next one, maybe in one after that. But for now, thanks for hearing me out, and until the next discourse, take care.